I'm meeting Peter Hinssen. He's a serial entrepreneur who just founded nextworks.be, but he's also a renowned international keynote speaker. He travels around the world to talk about the impact of technology on mankind and society. I'm meeting Peter in Hotel Marriott in Ghent, where he just gave, what do you think, a keynote.
Hi Peter. So
Hi.
in this show we'll be talking about your speaking experiences, so
Yeah.
not about your keynote itself.
Okay.
And because the fact that you're an international renowned keynote speaker, so thank you for making time for me.
More than welcome
us.
to.
Okay. You just finished speaking?
I did.
How was it? How did it go?
Really good. It was a small setting, so a very small team, and I kind of like doing that as well.
Yeah.
But it's more work with a small group than with a big group.
Tell me, how is it more difficult, or?
Because I think there's an intimacy with the audience that is completely different. People are there more in an intimate setting, and it's more like a workshop than a keynote speech.
Okay.
And in principle, I think a keynote is something that if there's 1,000 people or 5,000 people in an audience, you don't notice it anymore.
Okay.
But if it's 8 people or 12 people, that's a big difference. So I think the intimates are much more difficult than the bigger groups.
It makes you work harder,
Yes,
I think.
absolutely.
Yeah. So now tell me, how often a week do you speak in public?
It varies because there are cycles, but if you look at the peak periods like March or September, October, November, it can be up to 2 to 3 times a day.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so we have weeks where I have 10 or sometimes even 12 speaking arrangements, so that's quite intense.
And do you have any idea why these are the peak moments, March and November?
I do a lot of speaking for corporations, and typically what happens is that in March, April, they have like, oh, let's get inspired for the rest of the year.
Yeah, before summer starts.
And before summer starts, and then September, October, November, you have the same thing where they think about next year and next year's budget. And then those are just peak activities of corporates. And it seems like there are these peak dates where, of course, I can't multiply what I do, but sometimes you have like 10 or 12 requests for that one particular day. So there are these peak moments in the year that are almost incredible.
And how do you choose them?
Well, sometimes I really look for those engagements that I can get something back as well. An industry that I haven't seen before, a company I'd like to work with. Sometimes it's a location or a geography that I think is interesting to observe how they look at particular things. So it really depends. And of course, we have a couple of companies that we work with for a very, very long time. And then you have a certain feeling and bond with those companies, and you like to follow up what they do. Yeah. So those come into play when you think about choosing.
Yeah. Do you think that making that kind of choices is something you need to do straight away when you start speaking for public? Or is it because you're already a seasoned speaker and you think, I'm getting bored otherwise?
I think the problem now is that having to make choices is the fact that we just have so many requests. And this has been because of the books, because of the fact that nowadays days on YouTube, there are quite a lot of the things that I do online available, and it's easy for people to see. So it gets into like a snowball effect where, I think last year in total, we had about 350, 400 requests that we couldn't service because I couldn't fit it into the calendar.
Yes.
And then of course you have to choose, but in the beginning, let's be honest, you cannot be choosy. I mean, you have to take whatever you can get to get your voice out.
Take us back to the beginning. When was your first keynote ever?
My first keynote, my first presentation was back in 1995, so that's a long time ago, it's 20 years ago. I was an engineer, so my background is a technologist. I've always been in the world of technology. And what happened is I just started my own company, and I felt that nobody knew what I did, nobody knew what I was trying to do or what I was building. And I had the opportunity for a speaking slot at a very technical conference. And so I organized a meeting with the person who was running that particular event, and he didn't trust me. But he said, you know what you can do? You can be there at the coffee break, and during the coffee break, why don't you show something, do a demo?
Yeah.
So I went there and I did a demonstration during the coffee break, and people liked what I was talking about because he had difficulty getting people back into the auditorium because they were still drinking coffee with the demo that I was doing. And then he said, okay, so next time I'll give you half an hour. And then I think a month later, I had a chance to do my first keynote, just a very small one, half an hour, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And
you call this now a small keynote, 45 minutes. I think for a lot of speakers, starting off would be 45 minutes is huge.
It's huge,
It's the double of a TED Talk. But to you, it's nothing.
No, but I think because in those days, the beginning presentations were very technical. It was really about, I was talking technology to technologists.
Okay.
I was explaining how to build websites or how to configure servers, but it was very, very technical.
So your language was about technical stuff.
And doing demos takes a lot more time. So it was not like a typical keynote you would do now.
I think it's boring to me because...
You're right. And I think it is boring. And I think what I realized then is that if I would do it the boring way, like everybody else does it, then I wouldn't be able to stand out in a crowd. No. And I think early on what I learned there is that if you have the opportunity to make it really exciting, and I honestly, I can tell you, even very technical stuff, you can make that really exciting and really sexy. Then you have the opportunity to really engage with an audience. And I think that's probably why I got the flavor of doing these types of presentations.
Okay, tell us your secret then. What's yours? How do you transform something technical, boring into something sexy?
Well, I think one of the things that I've learned over time is you have to make it as personal as possible. You have to make it as directly tangible and impactful for an audience as you can possibly make that. Yeah. And even technology. I mean, we now live in a world where technology really has become mainstream, but it affects every single one of us. It's not just, a server or a router, but it's something that people use to do stuff with. And I think if you make it tangible and translate it to their context, make it something that really grabs an audience by the throat and makes it very real for them, then I think you have a chance to make a much more lasting impression on an audience.
But it's not easy for everyone to put something personal into a keynote speech, huh?
No, but I think what happened in my case is that over time, because I was trying to really relate it to the use of technology, a lot of the messages got picked up by non-technologists.
Okay.
And I think in the matter of, I think about 5 or 6 years, I was in the beginning doing keynotes and presentations, 99% for a technical audience talking about technology. And in about 5 or 6 years, I basically started doing 95% of my talks for non-technologists, to business people, because all of a sudden, what I was talking about made a lot more sense to them to understand what was going on. And that was a complete shift in audience. Yeah.
Did it change your way of working as well?
It did in a way, because I think one of the strange things that you learn really, really quickly when you do this type of public speaking is that you can lose an audience really, really fast. I mean, getting the attention...
Did it happen to you?
Oh, yeah, many, many times.
Okay.
I mean,
give us an example.
I'll give you a very practical example. One of the things that happened is if there's a language issue. One of my worst experiences I've ever had public speaking was in Japan. I was by that time quite routined in doing presentations. I also actually did quite a lot of presentations with simultaneous translation. I got invited to a keynote in Japan and I thought, hey, piece of cake. I spent the morning with the translators, 3 translators. I went through every single slide. I thought they had understood what had happened, but apparently something went wrong. And I start out, there's 300 people in the auditorium, 95% have earphones on. So I think, okay, they're all listening into the translation. I start out with a joke, no response. I do a second joke, no response. And at that moment you get worried, because I always use these jokes as a testing mechanism to see how the audience reacts. I do a third joke and the audience is just laughing like crazy. I think, okay, that was... So the whole time I'm thinking, what was that? And then the rest was a completely horrible, horrible presentation, no response from the audience. And afterwards, a friend of mine who speaks Japanese had been listening into the translators, and he said, this was a disaster. You made one joke and the translator didn't get it. You did a second joke, the translator didn't get it. And then you did a third joke, and he literally said to the people, this is now the third time the Western has made a joke. Please
The Western.
laugh.
Oh, God.
And then you think, my God, I
God.
completely failed to make a relationship with the audience. And those kinds of things just happen. I mean, it's part of being out there.
But I suppose you already returned to Japan to do another keynote. Did you change something? Did you?
I mean, I think the more international the audience gets, the more you see that the examples you give, the humor that you use is so localized.
Yes.
You have to be so in tune with the geography of an audience. Some things can be really funny or completely offensive for some audience. You have to be very careful about the examples that you use. Yeah. And it's too easy to always look from your point of view. You really have to flip it around and think from the audience point of view.
And how do you research that?
Well, I spend a lot of time, of course, when I look at examples to figure out what are the local examples that you could give. Okay. I mean, in my field, what I see about technology, of course, is quite easy because everything is online, and then it's quite interesting and quite simple to actually find out exactly those examples that are very specific for a particular geography or a particular country. Yeah. I feel very comfortable on a stage, and I think this is something that has basically grown over the years. But I have no problem with nerves. The only nerves that I have is I'm anxious to get onto that stage. Okay. I want to be there.
Yeah, that are the good ones, huh?
Well, I don't know if that's the good ones, but it's how I feel. Whenever I'm there, typically you're there half an hour and a half in advance. You set everything up, and I can't wait to get onto that stage.
And what would you do in advance?
Well, I try to do as little small talk as possible because I find it distracts me a little bit. But what I love to do is look at the people that I will be speaking to. Yeah. So if there's like a zone where they have coffee or they have lunch, I love to look at them. Okay. I don't like to talk to them because I like to be on my own, but observing the audience and seeing them interact, seeing them mingle, seeing them talk, and you start to observe and feel what that audience is like, because those are the people that are going to be looking at me in half an hour, in an hour's time.
One of my other guests in this show always wants to talk to the people in the public beforehand, because he wants to know what they are talking about, what's going on in their minds. So it's inspiration for him. He might use on stage, but that's not the case.
No, I don't like that. I like to be a little bit, a moment of zen to reflect and just feel comfortable. But I'm very eager to get onto that stage, and the moment that I'm there, I feel very calm. I'm more relaxed actually being on stage talking than I am in smaller groups of people. I'm not the most social person in the world, and in small talk, I mean, it's always funny when there's a family reunion. And I'm the quiet one in the family. I mean, I never talk. And then people say, this is crazy. You talk to audiences for thousands of people and you feel comfortable, but you're in family, you just shut up. And this is how I am. I mean,
talking is work for you.
Well,
being silent
is work, but I really enjoy the possibility of bringing something that an audience can do something with, that you feel that it has some sort of an impact, or they start to think differently. And that's probably why I do it. It's not because I want to talk, but I love the effect that the talk has on an audience.
Are you very conscious about your body when you're on stage?
More than I used to be.
Oh.
I mean, it's also probably because I feel very much at ease with the material. I mean, I don't really have to think about the content anymore. So I can probably spend more time to think about how am I being perceived on stage. Okay. So it's something that I've actually, gotten to appreciate and learn a little bit more. But it's about figuring out a way to understand how I actually am on stage. And in that sense, I'm probably more in tune with my body than I used to be.
But it could worry you when something happens, when you feel your trousers don't fit as well, you've eaten too much. Does that bother you then?
No, but in terms of that, I always try to make sure that I'm well prepared when I go on stage.
Okay.
So even when there's, for example, like a dinner presentation, I never eat. I mean, I just want to be completely physically fit, mentally prepared by the time I have to speak.
You'll have to if you're speaking 3 to 4 times a day.
Yeah.
That means 3 times an hour, something.
Yeah, I mean, typically the speeches that I do are about 45 minutes to an hour. If I do shorter speeches, I don't like them very much because there's, I think, too much pressure to time that in 12 minutes or 18 minutes. It's a real challenge to do the smaller type of presentations because the type of things I talk about is something that is really difficult just to focus on one area. I like the 45 minutes to an hour. My favorite ones are, but they're not keynotes, but when I do lectures for, say, London Business School, and it's half a day or a day, and I can talk for 8 hours. And you feel physically exhausted after 8 hours, but it's so wonderful to be able to tell everything that you want to tell to an audience.
Yeah, yeah. And when you go home after working like that, does your voice still resonate in your mind? To me, it seems like I'm going on in my mind all the time, even though I stop talking in real life. It just goes on and goes on.
Yeah, it goes on. And of course, if you have an opportunity afterwards, and this is what as I said, I don't like to talk to people before. I love to engage afterwards.
Yeah.
I don't like Q&A because I think that's very, it's very fake sometimes. But if I have an opportunity to spend some time with people that were in the audience, to engage, discuss, have coffee with, talk to them, I love doing that.
Yeah.
And it's those type of questions that keep ringing in my mind when I go home. Yeah. It's those things that keep me mentally prepared and think, hey, that's something I haven't thought about, or that's new material, or this is something that I could use next time. Yeah. That kind of a feedback is essential, and that's something that really resonates going forward.
Now, as all speakers do, you use PowerPoint or something of a kind of a visual on stage. Do you still depend on it?
I do. So I don't use PowerPoint. I use Keynotes. But some people say, oh, it's a technicality, but I kind of really like Keynote. It's a much simpler tool, but much more visual. And the nature of my presentations are very visual presentations. So this is something that has been maybe the biggest change that I've seen in the course of those years. But if I do a typical keynote now for about 45 minutes or an hour, I will use between 250 and 400 slides. And if I say that to a seminar organizer beforehand, they think I'm crazy. They think I'm nuts. Because many of them still think that, oh, wow, one slide is 3 minutes. Yeah. And I really flip that around. And I think the rate of consumption of information is so different now. I see a lot of really bad presentations. I still see people with PowerPoints and bullets like it's 1996 all the time. I see executives who do presentations that are so boring because people read it faster than they can actually recite it. Yeah. And I think this is a sign of the times. I mean, if you look at how movies are made today, if you look at TV series, if you look at a newsreel from 20 years ago, you think it's the most slow-moving, boring experience. Yeah, and that type of change is absolutely
I think
prevalent.
the reason why there are still lots of keynotes or PowerPoints with bullet points in it is because the speaker himself doesn't know what he's going to say, so he relies on what he's saying, and he didn't study his text.
That's true, and what I have is I still rely on the visuals because it's part of the experience that you're trying to give. But I could probably do exactly the same thing without the visuals, but it's because the story is completely there. Yeah. And if there's one thing that I do is I make sure that the story is completely in my mind.
And how do you do that? Did you study? Did you rehearse at home in front of your dog and children?
No, I don't rehearse. But what I do is every time that I do a presentation, I just go through the entire timeline in my keynote presentation, that I know exactly what I'm going to talk about, and I know exactly what the flow is.
Okay.
But I need to study that for at least 10-15 minutes before I start. And then it's in my mind and I know what's going to happen. I know which visuals follow. And I think it's really important that you have that narrative really very clearly in your head, because it's about the story. And I think if I wouldn't have that, I wouldn't be able to do the presentations that I do today.
Yeah. And how do you prepare for something that happens? Technically, the light falls out, your mic doesn't work, I don't know, disasters that happen during your talking on stage. How do you prepare? How you
Well,
live with
disasters
that?
are, yeah, I mean, let's be honest, everybody hates that. But I've become a little bit of a maniac to prepare. So I take my audiovisual testing really, really seriously. So I make sure that there's plenty of time to test, you know, the quality of the presentation, the quality of the sound, quality of the mic. I really, really do that. I mean, more often when you do the larger presentations and the larger stages, there's a very technical, competent AV crew who can help you with that. But if something happens, then you're going to have to wing it. Huh?
Yeah.
One of the worst experiences I've ever had was, this was in the days when, this is more than 10 years ago, but I had a computer that was not very stable. And I knew that I had to replace it but you're going on so fast paced that I just didn't have time to buy a new computer. So I had a computer that I knew that if I shut it down, just flip the lid, it wouldn't wake up anymore. I had to restart the whole thing. But if I just put it in sleep mode, it was fine. So I did a presentation, and the guy before me said, I don't want to take out my laptop. Can I put my presentation on your computer? I said, no problem, man. So I load his PowerPoint onto my computer. And I'm sitting there, and there's like 1,200 people in the audience. He gives his presentation for half an hour. And then he closes, and there's applause, and jump, he said. And I walk up, and I think, shit, I'm not going to wake it up anymore. And I had to talk for 35 minutes, and I couldn't wake up the machine anymore. And you're there going, dang, 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 while you're already talking to the audience. And then I just said, forget it. I'll just do my presentation without the visuals. And I think it's the true test to see if you really know your narrative. But the irony was, even then, I was running through the slides in my head. I was knowing exactly what would typically be there. But then you just have to follow the narrative.
For me, if something happens on stage, I see it as an opportunity to make more contact with the public.
Yeah.
Because at that moment, you have a memory made together. So it's a perfect moment to
unique.
To tune in and to make them, to feel related. So I use it and I make jokes and I tell other stories. And if everything goes back as normal afterwards, they're listening more carefully than before.
Yeah, that's true. That's
so I
absolutely.
always hope there's something small. I don't want.
I
don't like mics to fall down, because if the microphone doesn't work, I have to shout. And okay, I'm an actress, so I know the drill.
Yeah.
But it's so tiring to speak without a microphone.
Yeah.
But for the rest, I can give my talk in the dark.
Yeah, but nobody likes mistakes and things that happen. And over the years, I think my tolerance for bad audiovisual crews have gotten it's weird. I mean, I come in and I immediately can see whether it's a good AV crew or a bad AV crew. And every time it's a bad AV crew, I get really worried. And then I try to test everything as much as I can.
Now let's talk about your books. It's common knowledge that lots of management and business books are written because of the speakers' engagements that could follow out of it. Was the book first, or did you start speaking first and afterwards the books? Or?
No, so I started speaking 20 years ago, and then the first book only came out 7-8 years ago. Something happened 8 years ago. I was doing a really big presentation in the US, and this was a really typical US type Vegas style presentation, 3,000 people in the audience, a very professional MC, and the MC had no idea who I was, but he knew I was European, so that was kind of edgy. And then I was backstage with the MC, and just before we get on when he introduces me, he said, "Oh, what's the title of your book?" And I said, "I don't have a book." And he said, "You don't have a book?" And at that moment I realized if you want to do anything in the US, you need a book. And it was a really good idea because I was going through a lot of, you have a lot of experiences that you encounter when you do the speak, and at a certain moment it crystallizes in your mind what your message is. And it was a really great opportunity to actually crystallize that into a book. But in my case, speaking came first, books came afterwards. But it's now a routine where every 3 or 4 years when I think, you know what, I've touched upon a new theme, this is something that's a nice package, it makes sense, it's coherent, then I try to crystallize it and put it into a book. And it's always really, really nice when you have a book to say, hey, that's a conclusion of a chapter of thoughts and ideas.
And then do you still go on giving the keynotes or the talks about your first book? Or
No.
No, you stop.
Well, I mean, this is sometimes quite challenging because, so for example, the previous book was The New Normal, and there's quite a lot of videos out there of The New Normal on YouTube. I mean, there's a really good presentation that I've done 4 years ago in Berlin. That's pretty much what I wanted to say. And then sometimes now we get people who call me up and said, "Oh, we want you to do that presentation that we've seen on YouTube." And I said, "Well, why? Just play the YouTube video." And they say, "No, we want you to do that." And you think, you know what? I've moved on. Huh?
Yes.
And then this is something which is the irony of a successful YouTube video. I sometimes feel, almost compassionate for the guy who has to play Paradise by the Dashboard Light again. When you think, God, he must be really tired of that song by now. But sometimes people really like you to do a certain thing. But that's really difficult for me. I mean, the presentation evolves every single day. Every day there's about an hour that I spend where I get input or feeds from, I spend about an hour a day looking at sites, visuals that I just store, and maybe 1 or 2 or 3 new slides come out of that. So it changes every single day. But sometimes you have people who say, play that video again.
Do you have any idea how many times you talked about the new normal?
I think it's about 1,000 keynotes of the new normal. So that was a lot. And then you have that Paradise by the Dashboard Light feeling after a while.
How do you keep on making it excited for you?
Well, I mean, because I constantly try to refresh. I mean, it starts with the new normal, but then it gets into the stuff that I picked up recently or that I find really interesting or that are examples of that. The other thing is that, I mean, I get invited to do the talks in a lot of different industries. And then you can think, hey, I'm doing something for a banking customer today, or something for an insurance company, or an automotive, or a retail, or a food manufacturer. And then you try and figure out what it means for their sector. And that's still really nice to do. I think that's what keeps it interesting. But if I wouldn't find it interesting anymore, I'd do something else. I mean, I'd quit it in a heartbeat.